Welcome back, everybody, to the official relaunch of Riding the Pine. I am, of course, your host, Kyle Martin. I am joined today for a Blackhawks exclusive by none other than Josh Barlog. You can follow him at Josh Barlog on Twitter. He is weekly on Natty Nights. He is the host of that, which you can catch every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 8 p.m. Central Time. Josh, how are you doing today?
I'm good, man. Thanks for having me on, and I'm excited to get back into some Blackhawks hockey. I know it's a bit of a weird year in 2020, but I think before we know it, the puck's going to drop again, and we'll be tearing this team apart.
Yeah, well, I'm trying to take it as a little bit more of a positive approach because I think one thing I don't think they're going to be awful. And I don't buy into this notion that everybody's saying that this is a quote unquote like tear it down rebuild. I don't know if people have noticed or not, but the Blackhawks have been pretty bad the last 3 years, and they've gotten the third overall pick 2 years ago and a lot of young up and coming players. So they're not like just starting a rebuild; they've been in a rebuild. And kind of on that note, since the last time we talked, the draft has happened. Do you have any opinions on the Blackhawks draft?
I think, I mean, admittedly, so my draft knowledge isn't quite there, but I can tell you that based on the things that I have looked at, I would call it mediocre at best.
Yeah, I would say that's a pretty good assumption. I mean, again, I am kind of with you, and I think most people are that are commenting, whether you're paid as a journalist to do this kind of stuff, unless you're an actual scout. Everything is you're going off secondhand knowledge, obviously, but just looking at what kind of where players were ranked, and then kind of the analysis afterwards. This kind of looks like one of Bowman's worst drafts, which is not good considering that this was supposed to be a like super talented draft class.
Well, I mean, then again, like, and on the other side of things, in the past, there have been a lot of Blackhawks fans that were like, "Wow, great draft, Stan," and then he trades all these guys away, and they either tear it up or they're completely pissing down their leg. Where now we look at this year and everybody's kind of like him hawing about the draft. I mean, hey, you never know. What if these guys end up turning out to be something?
Right. Well, and there's I think that's the one thing I think that you have to give the Stan Bowman credit, and I'm not even sure if it's necessarily him more than it is his father, but the Blackhawks scouts are some of the best in the league, and they've proven that time and time again. Obviously, I believe since the last time we talked, Jan Ruda now has a Stanley Cup ring to go with Michael Kempney. Who would have ever thought both of those players would have Stanley Cup rings? But you look at those two guys, you look at Dominik Kubalik, you look at Artemi Panarin, all these guys that were either drafted and then not signed or just straight up not drafted at all that were brought over from Europe and Russia. Speaks volumes. And really, their first round picks when they've had them have all almost made it to the NHL except for Mark McNeil. You got Tavo, you got Yuki Haru, you got Boquist, Doc, Schmaltz, Beaudin's played in a game, Hartman. So, all of these guys usually in the first round that they take, even if they're not stars, they are, bottom six guys. So usually their first round's pretty good. I feel like the problem that I had with the draft, and I think a lot of people did, was they took a lot of guys that I think could have been had later. So they could have traded down, whether that be for, more picks or roster pieces or, whatever. I think there were also players on the board that could have been ready quicker. Like they took Lucas Reichel, who's a left wing, their first pick at 17th overall, and like even he said himself, he's at least 2 years away, and that's probably on the optimistic end of things. So um, I don't know, and a lot of people too, I think, were really lambasting that they take goaltenders, and they did take a goalie with their second pick at 46. And I believe he was ranked on average in the 70th range. So they took him almost 30 picks higher than where he was slotted, at least on most draft boards. So, you got to look at that. And then you look, like, I'm looking at Corey Pronman's grading from The Athletic. He gave their entire draft a C+. And the last two picks in the 6th and 7th round at 172 and 188 they weren't even on the board. They were off the board picks. So it's one of those wait and see things, I guess, but it definitely seems kind of the consensus that it was at best an average draft, at worst awful. So
I mean, the one thing I think that that needs to be sort of at least brought up, right, is drafting for a professional team, right? Like, first of all, it's not easy. I mean, you can sit here all day and say, these are the list of guys that I want, and then when everything kind of gets put on the table, things change a little bit, and who knows what the actual approach was going into this draft, right? You either have your guy, you have your priorities, and you go for those priorities, right? Sort of like a best available guy, or you have this in front of you, like, we need to work on goalie depth for the next 5-10 years. We need to work on forward depth for the next 5-10 years. And then at that point, it's not necessarily best guy available. It's best guy available for your plan.
Right. Well, and I think that was an interesting, because I mean, you and I had talked about on Natty Nights, at least from my perspective, that it seems that they really needed to refocus, if you will, on their forwards, um, which, I mean, I guess they kind of went 50-50 in this draft. I think they took about 3 or 4 defensemen, 3 forwards, and a goalie. So that's fine, I guess, but like, and we'll get to this, but I was looking at their kind of depth, like what the roster is going to look like next year, potential moves and that kind of thing, like I said, which we'll get to. But they're really, really weak on right wing, very weak. All of their forward prospects, even the ones that, are, we don't really know if they'll turn out, kind of the guys that, either just signed or haven't signed yet, they're all like left wing and center. They pretty much have nothing on right wing. So that's I think, area of concern. And then obviously the defense is just, I don't know I really don't know what they're doing with their defense. And we're going to get into that. And perhaps that's a good segue into their trade, which I kind of referenced again on apparently my crystal ball episode of Natty Nights.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, Oli Mata was traded to the Los Angeles Kings for forward, not really prospect, Brad Morrison, who's a centerman. He's got 1 year left on his deal. He's 23 years old. I think he spent most of the year with the Fort Wayne Comets last year. For those of you unfamiliar with the minors, that's a league underneath the AHL. So he's not, in my opinion, not really a prospect, really. He was just a throw in, I guess. And then the Blackhawks also retained, I believe, $750,000 for the next 2 years on Mata's contract. So what did you think of that trade that Bowman made?
So I think this was strictly we need to move money sort of deal. I think this is also a move that frees up a defensive spot. because we talked a lot about like, okay, Boquist needs time and Ian Mitchell needs time eventually. So I think this is just one of those things where like somebody's got to go, and Mata was the guy to pack his bags. I don't know too much about this Morrison kid, but I'll tell you what, I think one thing that I do like is the fact that he's 23. You can say what you want about his skill set now, but I'm okay with getting somebody. I would be concerned if he was like 26, 27, and you know what you're getting. But when a kid's 23, who knows? Next couple of years, he could really blossom.
Yeah, I mean, there's always potential there, and like you said, he's really he was not the point of the trade. The point obviously was to one, clear some cap space, as well as open up a defensive spot for a rookie coming in, which we're going to get into again because subsequent moves were made that are really head scratching. But I actually like this trade from Stan Bowman, and the reason I like it is in the event that he couldn't move to Hahn, or that he didn't want to move to Hahn or Murphy, Mata, one of those three was going to be moved. And obviously it ended up being Ole Mata. We talked about potentially him being bought out. Now, that's kind of where I think the salary retention comes in, and why a lot of fans, at least with this salary retention, should be happy, because had they not traded Mata and they just bought him out, they would have been basically paying about the same on the cap for retention. But instead of it only being for 2 years, it would have been for 4 years. So the Blackhawks are actually saving money in that regard with the trade, that, Mata's cap hit of $750K that's retained will be gone in 2 seasons versus 4 had they actually had to buy him out. So in the long run, I think that was a pretty good trade by Bowman. Now, let's really open up the can of worms here, because the next move, or let's say lack of a move, that Bowman announced was that he would not be re-signing Corey Crawford. And obviously that sent, I think, most of Blackhawks Twitter into a full meltdown. And the Blackhawks kind of said, or at least Bowman kind of indicated, that they're going young. Now, obviously, I've been an advocate of this move for actually 2 years, but definitely this season for sure, just because I wanted to see, I think for me, Kevin Lankinen. But even so, Delia needs time. He's never really gotten a look. They did re-sign Malcolm Subban, which I think Josh and I would both agree that was probably not something we wanted to see.
Yeah, it's a joke.
But I want to point out with that too, and I kind of did some digging, and it may not be this, but you have to keep in mind. So the expansion draft is upcoming, and you are required to expose a goalie in that draft. Now, normally, if a player is not signed, so all your drafted players are protected, players with no movement clauses or no trade clauses have to be protected, and you can protect one goalie, and then any player that's played 2 years or less of professional hockey is also protected. So, for example, Dominic Kubalik would be protected. Kirby Doc is protected. Pius Suter will be protected but the Blackhawks won't actually have to protect them because they have 2 years or under of service time. However, Delia has 2 years, Lankinen has 2 years, and Subban has quite a bit more than that. So, and this might go into the Crawford thinking too, where if you didn't give Crawford a 1-year deal, maybe you could have exposed him. But see, I don't, would he have not required a no movement clause? I don't know. There's a lot to look at it with that. But at the same time, you don't, like, if you're Seattle, you're not going to take Crawford because,
If you're Seattle, I don't necessarily think you go with a Delia or Lankinen either.
well, I
If
think
we're gonna talk
Lankinen,
about that, I mean,
Lankinen's a guy, which is why I think. I mean, we can get into this, but I think a lot of people, at least fans, that may not be familiar with the Blackhawks prospects and minors and all of that kind of fun stuff, might be sleeping on him a bit because, and if you kind of read what people are saying about what the Blackhawks are doing, I read something, I think it was today, about that Powers and Lazarus had put out about what the executives and scouts are saying about the goaltending situation. Uh, Lankinen seems to be the guy they think is going to be their starter. Um, and, one of the interesting things about this, too, is, which I kind of mentioned to you, that, Lankinen is still waivers exempt. So he can be freely sent back to Rockford. Delia and Subban cannot. So that's going to be interesting in camp because if Lankinen is the guy right now, one of Delia or Subban is going to have to clear waivers to be sent back down to Rockford. I'm not sure anybody would take either of them, to be honest, but you never know. And I think, that's the thing to look at. If Lankinen is your guy, I think you have to play him now because even if he isn't, if you don't play him now and you want to get him another year in Rockford, I do think that's a guy that Seattle would look at because if you look at the roster and who's protected and who isn't, the Hawks really don't have anybody that jumps out that they would want to pick. I don't think. Like Lankinen would be kind of one of the best players available. Dahan would be available if he's not traded. Shaw would be available. Both those guys are injury prone. I guess Zadorov would be available because he's a restricted free agent. So maybe him, but really, Kubalik's automatically protected. Suter's protected. Kane and Toews, DeBrincat. I imagine Strome will all be protected. Doc is protected. So, I mean, they don't really have now that and Saad was going to be a free agent anyway, and now Mata's gone. So there really isn't much there that you would want. I mean, none of the defensive prospects are going to be available because they don't have 2 years. Well, no, yeah, Bodan was his first season was last season. So Regula just signed, Mitchell just signed, Kalanick just signed. So maybe Lucas Carlson, but their top 2 guys that they might want are probably Lankinen and Carlson. And I would think that
I
you
think
would.
I think you bring up Carlson's good, but at the same time, right? I don't necessarily know what their philosophy is with goaltending because I want to make this clear. What my philosophy of goaltending is if your plan was to use Delia or Lankinen full time in the next 2-3 years, let's call this. I'm rewinding to pre 2020, 2019, 2020 season. So let's try and get ourselves in that mindset. If your plan was to use Delia or Lankinen, Delia's 26. A lot of people are saying if you're going to throw him in, you need to do it now. I probably would have found a way to part ways, and maybe this was their plan. I don't know when they moved Leonard, but I would have immediately called one of those guys up and let him ride out the rest of the season. Because now my philosophy is you bring up the young kid with a more veteran guy as your number one, and you slow drip them into getting that full-time role. And then it becomes easy to part ways with your veteran goaltender. But unfortunately, COVID-19 hit. It was odd. And now you're in a situation where your quote unquote veteran guy is Malcolm Subban.
Yeah, well,
And by the way, so if people don't know, I'm a big Corey Crawford guy. but I was hesitant on reacting at that Corey Crawford situation because I didn't necessarily know what those details were going to be. And those details turned out to be about $400,000. So at that point, it sort of becomes more a fault of Corey Crawford.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned that to you. And keep in mind, none of us know what the actual offer was, but what's being reported is that he was offered a 1-year deal at $3.5 million, and I've seen some people say it was 3 million. But let's just stick with the 3.5. That sounds more reasonable to me. That's what was initially reported. He signed for 3.9. Granted, it was for 2 years and not one, so he's got an extra year on that deal. However, he's going to a team that it's probably about the same as the Hawks, but they have a lot more younger talent and not, really any veteran presence that the Hawks have. Um, and he's not going to be the starter there. Like, he may be the starter to start the season, but Mackenzie Blackwood is their heir apparent. That's who
I
they're.
just don't understand how I don't understand. And maybe a Devils fan who's closer with the team can raise this, can give me a couple points on this. I'm failing to see the argument where Corey Crawford goes there and just takes the starting job away from Mackenzie Blackwood. They loved Mackenzie Blackwood last year.
Well, I think it was what you were just saying. I think that's Corey Schneider was on the Schneid. All right. They sent him to Lowell. I think that's their AHL affiliate. And they bought him out, and then they brought in Crawford. And say what you want about Schneider, but even when he was at his best, he wasn't Corey Crawford. Corey Crawford has pedigree. He's got 2 rings. He's been there. He's done it. He's got far superior playoff experience than Schneider ever did, even when he was with the Canucks. So, and I don't even think, the last cup run that the Devils went on that they lost to the Kings, I think that was Schneider's first year with them, but he was still backing up Brodeur. I mean, so they kind of, eased him in. So he wasn't even really getting those high, pressure games the last time they made a run. So I think, like you were just saying, where you kind of have a veteran and you bring your, heir apparent along, and kind of eventually mid-season, the heir kind of takes over. I think that's what they're doing. And, maybe they had to give Crawford the extra year. Maybe that was the sticking point that Bowman didn't want to do. But it just seems very odd to me from Crawford's standpoint. I don't know if it was arrogance or what it was, but you have to remember, number one, it's a flat salary cap, and he's 36 years old. So, and he's injury prone. So he's not going to get $6 million. 3.5, I think, even to me, is a lot of money for Crawford, especially at 4. And we obviously discussed that earlier. I think Crawford would have been much more palatable around 2.5. But still, he walked away from his legacy in Chicago, the only team he ever played for, all of his friends, the fans, for 400 grand. And it's not even 400 grand. If he was offered 3.5 million, he got 400 grand extra to go to New Jersey, or really New York, because I'm sure he'll probably live, across the Hudson in New York. But even still, 400,000 after taxes is really only about like 270 grand. So he left his legacy. He left a better job because he would have been the starter in Chicago, at least, again, to weather either Delia or Lincoln. And as you and I discussed, most likely had Crawford been retained, Delia would have been the backup. Subban would have probably been let to walk, and Lankinen would have been starting in Rockford at least to start the season because you want Lankinen starting. You don't want him sitting on the bench if that's your guy for the future, and then eventually you bring him up. But and I think maybe that was the plan because they also signed Tompkins.
Yeah.
And the
Forgot about
goalie situation now is getting even weirder because Rockford just went out and signed a goalie to an AHL contract. So I don't know what's going on. But just on the Crawford point, which you brought up, he did this to himself. So like all the comments that came out later that he was devastated. Look, you're Corey fucking Crawford. I think you're overrated. But either way, you've been in my opinion, you've been an above average goalie for your career. You've got 2 Stanley Cup rings. You're in the 3rd largest TV market in the U.S. And you're Crawford. Your legacy is here. You can make $250K in endorsements in Chicago.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think one thing to kind of dissect the devastation comment, right, is like if you knew that if you left you would be devastated, maybe you just take a little bit less money, right? Like there's something to be said about players finishing their careers with one team. And I'm not going to sit here and say like, oh, Crawford should take the less money and he should take no playing time just to finish as a Hawk. But like we all know he would have played.
Right. He would have been the guy.
Yeah, he would have been the guy until his knees blow. Like he would have been the guy, and then all of a sudden it's like, hey, Crow, thanks for your time. We appreciate you. You're gonna get it some statue or some plaque or whatever, and we're gonna carry on with these young guys. Instead, we're left with a weird goalie situation where Malcolm Subban is probably going to be the starter, and who knows?
I don't see. That's what's weird. The re-signing of Subban is really what's weird because if you really wanted it to be like, I'm not convinced that a training camp is going to produce who is going to, be the guy, especially with 3 young goalies. And I mean, Subban really isn't young. But then, like we talked about previously too, uh, Subban is like awful. Like statistically, he's like one of the worst goaltenders ever. And as I said before, is he? Probably not. But still, he's not good. And he's been, somebody made the excuse, well, you know, he was drafted by Boston and they had Tim Thomas and then Rask took over and then he was still blocked by Rask and then he went to Vegas and, Marc-Andre Fleury was there. But I
Yeah,
don't buy,
that's
buy
great.
that.
But even when he played, he was terrible.
Yeah, like he wasn't even average. Like he was dog shit. And then not only that, but remember the first year of Vegas, which that magical run they went on when they went to the final against Washington, that Fleury was injured the first quarter of the season. Like, and then Subban was the starter. And I believe he was claimed off waivers, and that's how he ended up in Vegas. And then he got injured. And then I believe the next guy up was Donsk. And then Donks played for a while, and then I think he got injured. So they had went through like 3 or 4 goalies that first season, and eventually Fleury came back. But my God, like he had the option. Like this argument that he never was given a shot is not true. Like he did, especially with an aging goaltender that had just gotten injured in an expansion team's first season. I mean, yes, they're a good team and they were a good team from the start, but that's a pretty big opportunity from where I'm sitting. But either way, on Lankinen, here's my point that I think a lot of people are missing, and I just pulled up his statistics. So his last year in Finland, in the Liga, he played 15 games. His goals against average was a 133. His save percentage was a 946. Keep in mind that's the top league in Finland. Then he came over and he played in Rockford. That first season, he played 19 games, had a 250 goals against average, 910 save percentage. Then he went that same season, so this is last summer, he went to Finland in the World Cup. Now, this is the year that St. Louis won. And if anybody remembers, I know a lot of shit's gone down since 2019, but if anybody remembers, all the top seeds were eliminated. All of them. Tampa, Washington, Pittsburgh, like I think in both conferences, all of the like top 4 seeds were gone. So in that World Cup appearance, he played 8 games. His goals against average was a 150, and his save percentage was a 942. And in the qualifier game to get to the gold medal or the championship, whatever you want to call it, they played Russia. And just the top line of that team, and he shut them out in that game. The top line in that game was Alex Ovechkin, Evgeny Malkin, and Nikita Kucherov.
Pretty good.
Yeah. So, like, a lot of people that I'm seeing is like, oh, well, none of these guys are proven. The Hawks, it's going to be a disaster. We don't know if they can play or not. Like, no. Lincoln and even Delia's got like 16 games in the NHL. Granted, none of them were last year, which, I bitched about the last time we talked about. But Lankinen has played against the best. And, I mean, with that line, like Nikita Gusev was on that line or on that team. He was on their power play. He's a new young star for New Jersey. The guy can play. Is he going to be always a 942 save percentage? No. In fact, he may be terrible next year, but he's got to play. And at some point, both Delia and Lankinen, either one of them, Delia's 26, Lankinen's 25. Both of them are about the same age Crawford was in 2010. Now, you brought up the point about, kind of nursing your young guy along with the veteran to kind of groom them type of a deal. Crawford didn't have that. And he was thrown to the wolves. And that first season was rough in 2010. And arguably, if they had a different goalie in 2010, they probably would have beat Vancouver in that 7-game series. Crawford was not good in that series. He obviously improved as time went on, but, he had been in the minors for 7 years. Niemi was let to walk to San Jose, and they brought Crawford in. And I believe they had signed Marty Turco to kind of be that mentor guy, and Turco was awful. So maybe they just didn't want to do that again. They didn't want to throw a bunch of money at a semi-veteran goalie. But then again, considering the times, players probably don't want to take a 1-year deal if they can avoid it, just because who the hell knows what's going to happen with everything going on. So, again, I think in the long term, even in the short term, really, it was probably in their best interest to let Crow walk. I don't understand why they're keeping Subban around, other than maybe it has something to do with the draft. But as I said, Delia and Lankinen already have 2 years of service time, so they will be exposed. So if you want one of them, you have to protect them. So I think, to me, that leans me to go, well, if you really believe Lankinen's the guy, then you might as well just start him now. If you're going to protect him in the draft, regardless of what happens this year, just play him.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the point, right? Is like, no matter who they want to lean on, whether that be Lankinen or Delia, either way, these guys have to play. Like, unfortunately, the Blackhawks are now in a position where you can't necessarily lean on a small sample size of these guys, because in the past 2 years, they really haven't played, other than, Colin Delia a couple of years ago. But like, at this point, you kind of got to do what you did with Corey Crawford. You kind of just got to throw him in and see what happens. And that's the unfortunate thing, which I don't know if you're ready to segue, but I do want to talk about this Crawford situation in the waking of the status of this team and how Toews and Kane and the core are a little uneasy about what's going on, because I think when you look at like the moves that they've made, the trading Brandon Saad and trying to move some money around, you're freeing up some cap space. What are you exactly trying to do with that? Because
Well, let's talk about the Sod trade before we talk about
sure.
the before we talk about Bowman talking to Kane, Keith, and Taves. So, uh, I don't think it's any secret. Just like I said with Crawford, I wasn't a huge fan. I didn't like Sod. At least Sod was an okay player. I liked him in 2015. Uh, I did not like that trade when they made it for Anisimov and who else did they get? They got Forsberg and then another prospect. His name's escaping me. But either way, I don't think that was a good trade. And then they reacquired him, obviously, for Artemi Panarin. That, in my opinion, is the worst trade in team
Yeah.
history. And quite frankly, I think this second or third trade involving Saad, now sending him to Colorado, is again maybe not one of the worst trades in team history, but it's definitely one of the worst trades that Stan Bowman has ever made.
Based on the return.
Yes. Now, so it's come out that they could not get picks or prospects. So my response to that is, why didn't you just hold him to the trade deadline?
Yeah.
And somebody said, well, we're hearing it was because of money. Well, that doesn't make sense because, as we'll get to, they signed Yanmark and Walmart for about $3 million. So, and they're already retaining $1 million on Sod. So that's four of Sod's $6 million. So you're telling me that they needed to clear $2 million of cap? And it's more than that, actually, because the piece that they acquired in the Sod trade was Nikita Zadorov. Now, this trade is just, I really don't know, for lack of better terminology, what in the fuck Bowman was doing. Because you're trading your best trade asset, which is Sod. You also include Dennis Gilbert. Now, they also have Nick Seeler, right? Gilbert and Seeler are kind of the same player. I like Gilbert more than Seeler. Gilbert's younger, but you get the idea. They're big defensemen that you have on your team to take hits, to beat the shit out of somebody should somebody start taking liberties with your star players, that kind of a guy. That is what Zadorov is. So you're essentially trading Gilbert for his older version of him. Gilbert, I think, is 23, 24 years old. Zadorov is like 26, 25. So you're getting a more established Dennis Gilbert, basically, in this trade. Now, this trade just makes no sense anywhere. You're getting like Zadorov is not a top four defenseman. People are trying to make it seem like he is, but he's not. For point of reference, analytically, and on the defensive side of the game, Ole Mata and Slater Cuckoo were both better. And you could have brought Slater Cuckoo back probably for 1.5 mil. Now, they just re-signed Zadorov to, I believe, a $3.2 million deal. So, again, this supposedly saving money thing doesn't make sense because they just threw out about $3 million to two players, and they gave Zadorov $3.2 million. So, effectively, they're actually $200,000 over what they were paying Sod. Plus, they retained $1 million on the Sod trade. I think really you're getting the inferior player by a lot in Zadorov. You're not getting a pick. You're not getting a prospect. And then you're still retaining money in the deal. Like, that to me takes this from a bad trade to an awful trade.
It almost feels like to me that a lot of these moves that Stan Bowman has made over the past couple of years, it feels like Stan Bowman has an idea of what he wants. Like he's like, okay, we're dealing Brandon Saad today. These are the teams I'm going to call. Pittsburgh doesn't answer. Philly doesn't answer. Tampa Bay doesn't answer. So Colorado's on the list. And he's like, okay, here's what I want from Colorado. I want to pick and I want a prospect. And he's on the phone. He's like, okay, Colorado, it's Stan. Listen, I want to deal Saad. I want to pick and a prospect. And Colorado's like, no chance. You're not getting a pick or a prospect. We'll give you Zadorov, but you need to do, or we'll give you Zadorov. And he goes, hey, can I get a pick with that? And they go, no. He goes, okay, fine. Okay, fine. We'll do it. Instead of swallowing his pride, hanging up the phone, or holding his pride, I should say, and hanging up the phone and holding him. I feel like if he doesn't come away with something when he's talking to these teams, like he thinks that it's a failure, so he like gives in.
So it came out today in the Lazarus and Powers piece where they talked to quote unquote scouts and executive sources. And that is also, by the way, where I'm getting that the Hawks were trying to save money, even though clearly they didn't. It was said in there that, quote, someone in the front office has wanted Zadorov for a long time, which does make sense in the sense that the Blackhawks way overpaid for him, like way overpaid. But what's curious about that statement is it says someone in the front office. Well, who the hell would that be if it's not Bowman? That scares the shit out of me. Is Bowman not in charge? Is it Kelly, the scout, the head of the scouting department? Is that who's making these decisions? Who is making these decisions if it's not Bowman? You know, I've speculated for a long time that the guy really in charge is Scotty Bowman and not Stan. And I think the more you start looking at these decisions and moves, you have to really speculate that if it wasn't for his last name, Stan Bowman would have been gone a long time ago. You look at the Panarin trade. Look, he's traded Brandon. He's had 3 trades involving Brandon Saad, and he has definitively lost all 3 of them. That takes some doing. One of them, like I said, being arguably the worst trade in franchise history. He signed Brandon Manning. Granted, one of his better trades was turning him into Drake Caggiula. One of his better trades was trading Andrew Shaw the first time, which netted the Hawks Alex DeBrincat with that second-round draft pick. However, what's he do? He turns around and reacquires Andrew Shaw after he's now concussion-ridden with a $4 million contract for the next 3 years, and he trades a second and third-round draft pick for him. And
the band back together.
Yeah, because this fetish that we have of reacquiring old players that were good at some point when they were in Chicago.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. Think about this. 10 years ago, who was on that Cup team? Toews, Kane, Seabrook, Keith, Crawford. Or I'm sorry, think 2013 and 2015. Right. All of those guys that I just named. Saad, and now who's on that Shaw? Who's on the team now? All of them. Like there's this weird obsession with like not moving on and thinking that the game hasn't evolved in any sort of capacity.
Well, to be fair, Shaw and Saad were like 22, 23 during those Cup runs. So, I mean, Saad's not even 30 yet, and neither is Shaw.
No, but when you look at Shaw, the product of Andrew Shaw is nowhere near what it was when he was on the.
Oh, well, no. Yeah, no.
That's just the point, right? I'm not talking age here. I'm talking the product. And realistically, when you look at Brandon Saad, as you said before, he is your highest your highest prize trade asset, and you pissed it away.
Yeah. your highest trade assets right now, without trading something of your future away, are Andrew Shaw. That's if he comes back and is healthy, and Dane DeHaan. No, we're not talking about movies here. We're talking about hockey. Calvin DeHaan, your top 4 defenseman, who's also
Yeah, I
injury
was going to say, and
riddled.
that's those are two players who are contingent upon them even coming back. I know, like a couple months ago, I was seeing a lot of people talk about, will Andrew Shaw even come back and play hockey? Like, I, I know that he was on Spit and Chicklets, the Barstool podcast, and he was like, "Yeah, I mean, I'm just working on myself, and I want to get back with the boys." But like, that was something months ago. Things change, and who knows what the hell his status is.
Yeah, I don't know. So I've heard that he's ripped and shredded and that he's ready to go.
Well, good. More power.
Yeah,
I mean, look, like
we'll
that's what I
see.
want. I just think you have to take a step back and be critical of these situations, because if you're not, you're going to be blindsided by these things, and you're going to need to clean up a mess that you could have avoided.
Well, right. He should never have reacquired Shaw to begin with because you already had Drake Kajula, who was essentially the same player
He's
and
an
younger.
Andrew Shaw.
I mean that, and then you like I said, the first time you traded Shaw, you got Alex DeBrincat. Great trade. You got something else. I think they got another pick for him. I don't remember who it was, but just DeBrincat alone, great pick, great trade. So what do? You kind of piss that trade away because then you go and give a second pick, I believe, in this year's draft, and then a third round pick in the upcoming draft for Shaw. And you're picking up his $4 million in cap hit. Like, how is it that Bowman is the one that's always retaining salary in these deals, or that Bowman's the one that's trading like more picks or prospects, or it's like I don't know. I mean, it feels like he's kind of the village idiot, and
Well,
I mean we can
I mean, I've always said he's kind of dopey.
yeah
First
we
of all, he's
I
kind
think
of
we can kind of move in now to what you were getting to earlier of, and I think you and I might disagree on this. So what is going on with the veterans in terms of Toews, Kane, and Keith, and I guess we can throw Seabrook in there since he's still around, as to whether they Lazarus put out a piece that basically said Toews is pissed, Kane is pissed, they're all pissed, and they don't know what's going on. Nobody seems to know what's going on. Even Stan Bowman seems to not know what's
yeah.
going on.
I'll tell you what, it just seems, and this has been my argument the entire time, it doesn't seem like this team has a direction.
This
Um,
team is, and I can't believe I'm saying this, they're a bigger shit show right now than the Chicago Bulls.
I knew you were going there.
And that is, I have not felt that a organization in Chicago has been a bigger shit show. Like, at least this feels right now like pre Kane and Taves Blackhawks,
Absolutely, it does.
where they
Yeah.
weren't on TV, they didn't have anybody in the stands, which they still don't. Like, that's where we're at now. And I mean, look, we've gone like 6 months now, and we still don't have a replacement for John McDonough. It's starting to feel like Danny Wirtz is going to be the president, and historically,
we talked about that on a previous episode of Natty Nights, the Hawks exclusive that we did. I'm like, this doesn't feel like they're going to find a replacement. That's not at all what this feels like. It feels like the Wirtz fam is like, you know what, Danny, you're a good old boy. Why don't you just take care of this?
which
And
is not good.
no, it's not good at all. And the crazy thing to me with this I guess onslaught of moves that Stan Bowman has made, that I think arguably maybe 20% of them are good over the past couple weeks here. What bothers me the most is that when you signed Taves and Kane to these monster contracts, and you throw Seabrook in there as well, and Keith, really, you're talking about your core here. Not only are you investing in them as players, but you're investing in them as your core. You're investing in them as sort of voices of the locker room, and they're subsequently on a lower tier of management. I mean, they really are. If you're giving these players that much money and they've been around for so long and you've built around them for so long, they become a voice. And I get the I get the sense that when Stan Bowman was making these moves, they were not in that conversation. And that's
Uh,
an issue.
no, and I look from my perspective, and this is going to seem harsh. I don't think they deserve to be in that conversation. A lot of people are going to come after me on that, but they're players. Look, you have to do what is right for the organization. Now, would it have been nice if they would have been told, sure. Do they have to be? No. And should they be? Not necessarily. Look, you have to do what's in the best interest of the organization. And if, Patrick Kane goes, oh, well, I don't want you to get rid of Crow. Okay, well, sorry, but, it needs to be done. We're doing what we think is best for the organization. We're letting Crow walk.
But
Or,
I think the argument here isn't necessarily let's go ask Taves and Kane for permission to do these things. I think that they're so valuable to your organization, to your franchise, that you need to at least keep them in the loop. That might seem a little
well,
uh,
I would argue that.
that might seem a little like mainstream and like, oh, protect their feelings, but like you need to have enough respect for Jonathan Taves and Patrick Kane to sit them down and go, all right, boys, listen, this is the direction we're going. And you need to be flat out with them because transparency wins always, no matter what industry you're in. And would you rather Taves and Kane find out that Crow's gone by a text from Corey Crawford, or would you rather find that out and have a little bit of time to process it and have the ability to sort of look past that into what's going to happen in 2021?
See, I think I, it's kind of like we were just talking about. It's not like nobody knows what's going on. That's the problem. Like, look at the Cubs, look at the White Sox, look at the Bulls now. The management comes out and tells you, like, okay, we're not any good. We're tearing it down. This is what we're doing. And then whether it's the Cubs, the White Sox, the Bears, even from 3 or 4 years ago, they do what they say, and then in every scenario, arguably we can. I guess the jury's still out a little bit on the Bears, but at least from the baseball side, which I think are probably the two bigger instances of a team going into a rebuild, both of them have worked out. The Cubs are now on their decline. They're probably going to blow it up again. The White Sox are where the Cubs were back in 2015. They're looking for a manager to get them over the hump. They've got this talent. They've got the young players, the young prospects. But nobody knows what Bowman and the Hawks are doing. Now, we can get into the signings that I alluded to of Yanmark and Walmart, or Walmart, as I'm starting to call him. Those two guys, as we talked about on the exclusive, are bigger guys and they're defensive-minded players. Now, as I've always reiterated, everyone wants to shit on the defense. And I said, if you don't have good defensive forwards that can push the puck up and be, responsible in their own zones, Jesus, I'm getting punchy here. You're going to give up 60, 70 shots a game. Your defense gets worn down. Your goalies get run down. And bad things start happening. That's what we saw in Vegas. That's what we saw all season, 2-3 years now. And I think that's what those two signings are doing. They're adding guys that are bigger, penalty killers, defensive-minded forwards. The problem, though, is now, as I was looking at kind of where the roster stands at, so I kind of just threw a mock roster together. So my first line is Kubalik, Taves, Andrew Shaw. Second line is Pia Suda, Kirby Doc, Patrick Kane. Third line's Alex DeBrincat, Dylan Strome, and Alex Nylander. Fourth line is Janmark, Camp, and then either Carpenter or Walmart. Now, that's the thing, because Matthew Highmore is now a scratch. And who do you prefer, Carpenter or Walmart? That's a question, I think. And both Walmart and Janmark can play center. So is it Camp that comes out on that kind of all defensive line that they can throw out to shut down the top line of the other team? There's a lot of questions there. If you're wanting to go younger, that's the question. Like Bowman said, we want to play our young players. Well, this is basically the same roster now
Yeah.
without Crawford, without Saad, and you've added a couple guys. You kind of took Highmore out. It looks like Zach Smith is going to be LTIR'd. So Brent Seabrook probably looks like the seventh defenseman. Highmore's a scratch. And then you've got to kind of choose between those three, or I guess 4 guys, Janmark, Camp, Carpenter, Walmart. I assume Janmark for sure will be on the lineup every night.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, sort of to your point, right? You talked about, and I've been screaming at my TV for the past season and a half that Jeremy Colliton has taken over because of his system of like this run and gun. If they score 6, we're going to score 7 system. I think I've made that known. I'm not a fan at all of Jeremy Colliton. But when you look at these 2 acquisitions in Janmark and Walmart, these are 2 guys, and I forget the tweet that I saw. But they're one of the better forwards, better defensive zone players in protecting the slot. So, to your point, that's what we've been missing, right? Like these teams, these high-powered teams, and really mid-tier offensive teams, come into our zone, and they just tear us apart. They pump us for 3 periods. And we just try and survive. We have to scratch and claw to stay in these games. Our goalies are making 45 saves a night. And we're wondering why we're losing. So I think there's some sort of transition going on of like, oh my God, finally we understand what our issue is and we need to take care of this. But I think as a whole, the direction is still unknown. Like you talked about rebuild. The word rebuild continues to come up, not only in this episode, but on Blackhawks Twitter. And I think there's a sort of a rebuild. There's a sort of like at the end of each season, we have these voids that we think we need to fill, and we fill them, and then they don't work, and we try and tear it down a little bit, and then put things back together, and it hasn't worked. Until this team commits to a full rebuild, I don't think anyone's going to know what the hell is going on.
See, I think what we're looking at here is and I'll just say this before because I want to end with this, but I think we're looking at like a 2-year window of like retool. And there's something I want to circle back to before we get to that. It's very early on in this episode, we talked about Oli Mata and what that trade was meant to do in terms of opening up a roster spot. Well, back to the Saad trade that also is head scratching. Aside from basically you're acquiring Zadorov, who's the exact same player that Dennis Gilbert is, except that he's a little bit older and more a finished product now. You just took away that spot that you opened up by trading Mata. So now, like, again, in the roster that I put together to see what this team kind of looks like, you've got Keith and Murphy as your top pair. Second pair is DeHaan and Mitchell. And then your third pair is Zadorov and Boquist. Now, we all kind of knew Mitchell was coming in, and Seabrook's the odd man guy out, which I imagine will be what happens. The rumor is one of the reasons they wanted Zadorov is to get that big body to kind of protect Boquist. because, Boquist is starting to develop concussion issues, and they kind of want him protected with a big body out there. Makes sense, especially when you consider Boquist's offense. Maybe you protect him a little bit by dropping him down to that third pair. Problem is, though, from everything I've read, they promised Wyatt Kalynuk a roster spot. And he's ready to go. He's, I believe, 22, 23 years old. And he left a far superior organization in Philadelphia across the board, whether it's defensively or offensively. That's a team that's in contention right now. They have their goalie. They have a good defense. They have offense. He left them for a reason. He didn't just come to Chicago to play in Rockford. When you consider his age and you consider where he was drafted or where he could have went, let's say, did he not sign with Chicago? So this begs the question. I don't think Bowman is done yet.
No, but I'm glad you brought that up because I probably would have forgotten to ask you this. Is he's clearly attempting, whether he's doing a good job or not, attempting to clear salary to get somebody. Now, who do you think that is? And
I don't think he's going to get anybody.
You don't think so?
No. Dadonov just signed today, I believe, with Ottawa for about $5 million, $5.5 million. I think I've been talking about Hoffman. Hoffman is, I think he's a left winger, but he's a guy that puts the puck in the net. The rumor is he wants about $5.5 to $6 million. Again, on that special we did on Natty Nights, that was a guy I signed. I signed him for $6 million, which is exactly what he's supposedly looking for. But I don't think – so on this roster right now, and I re-signed Strome to a 3-year, $2.5 million contract. It might not be 3 years. They may do 2 years just to keep him as a restricted free agent. But either way, I think that $2.5 million is probably what Strome's going to get. The Blackhawks have, with him on the roster, $2.5 million, and with Smith on LTIR, they have about $5 million in cap space. Now, somehow, they've got a potential bonus pool of almost $6 million, which is a problem. Because if all of those bonuses are hit, that puts them $1 million over the cap, or almost $900,000 over the cap. So that could affect next season, because what happens when you have bonus overages and you don't have enough cap space for the year, whatever you're over, so in this case the $900,000 would go to next season. And obviously we don't see the cap going up, so that's eating into your salary cap again. Granted,
so basically what we're doing is running back last season with pretty much the same team, aside from a less superior goaltending situation, and pretty much no cap space, and the same systematic approach. So this is going to be another season where the Blackhawks hover around 500 and probably finish the year under 500 and missing the playoffs.
Well, I think that's the plan. So here's the thing. I talked about, again, before we talk about the draft, I think they're looking at, and this has been mentioned by several people, so I'm not going to take full credit for this, but I think they're looking at the 2023 season as when they're going to be back on the map. So that's 2 years from now. So if you look at what they have in their system, like we talked about at the beginning of the show, Reichel is probably 2 years away. Comesso, the goalie, I don't know. Again, I'm not trying to insult people, but Comesso is 18 years old. Goalies usually don't show up into the NHL until they're 22, 23 at earliest. Carter Hart is a anomaly. So I think Vasilevsky in 15 was 21, 22, somewhere around there. So you're looking, if he's 18 now, you're still looking at 4 or 5 years before he even starts entering the goaltending conversation. That's why I think, again, Lankinen is going to be your guy, at least in between, before, even if Comesso is the future, he's 4 or 5 years away, most likely. And that's probably on an optimistic trajectory. So their top prospects at forward are Tepley, Kurashev, and then a guy that I had mentioned to you earlier, Arthur Kayumov, who's 22. They drafted him, I believe, 4 years ago now, back in 2016. He's in the KHL. He's got a 2-year contract, so he's not going to come over until 2023 at the earliest. However, at his age, especially last year at age 21, he mimicked Artemi Panarin's age 21 season. I believe Panarin had maybe 2-3 goals more, but otherwise they were basically the same player. Kayumov, again's the left winger, same position that Panarin plays. So that's a guy to kind of keep your eye on. And he's not in the system because he's not signed. He has a contract over in Russia. So a lot of people don't even pick up on him. Tepley's a Czech. He's 19. They drafted him last year. Potentially could go back to juniors, I believe, or end up in Rockford. He's 6'3". He's got size. He's on loan right now over in Europe. Same thing with Kurashev. I believe the last time I looked, Kurashev had about 2 points in 4 games over there. So that's he's probably first in line, either him or Tepley. Actually, I take that back. Brandon Peary is first in line. That's another trade that we didn't really talk about with Vegas.
Yeah, sort of glossed over that one.
Yeah, Sakura. I mean, well, because essentially the Blackhawks are just trading the younger. They're basically the same player, and you're just trading the younger player, which again doesn't make sense. Now, if Brandon Peary makes the team, I was kind of trying to figure out where he'll be. He's probably going to be on your third line with DeBrincat and Strome because he's supposed to be a scorer. I mean, that's what everybody thought he was going to be when he was drafted. The problem there is at that position, you're sitting Nylander, and you're not going to play Nylander on the fourth line. And I don't think you really want to play or put Nylander. You can because he's eligible, but I don't really think you want to send Nylander to Rockford. That would seem kind of counterproductive to what you did last year. You didn't send him down last year. You kept him up the whole year. I don't think you send him down. So that's another guy who really, I think this is like a make or break year for him if he's not traded. I expect him to probably start the season with the team. And if we get to, a month, 2 months, 2.5 months into the season and he's still not doing anything, especially with, them needing to DeBrincat and Strome to kind of rebound, I think you'll see Brandon Peary come up and slot in there on that right wing where I have him tentatively playing. And maybe even with Suter, we don't know if Suter is going to turn out to be good. I suspect he will, but we'll see. And then obviously Andrew Shaw, like I said, your right wingers right now on the roster in the NHL are Andrew Shaw, Patrick Kane, Alex Nylander, Ryan Carpenter, and Lucas Wallmark. That's not good. Like, Kane is going to be 33. Nylander has so far yet to show anything. Carpenter and Wallmark are defensive bottom 6 forwards. And Andrew Shaw is, almost 30 and has serious concussion problems. And even Andrew Shaw, I have the top right wing with Toews and Kubalik, he's not somebody that's known to score, to be in that top 6. So, again, like I have constantly reiterated, they need another scorer. And it certainly looks like it's a right wing that they need. Now, we can get into the draft. So the 2 upcoming drafts. So I don't foresee them. I feel like the roster as is pretty much what it's going to be going into this year. I think Shaw has the potential to get traded to clear cap space. DeHaan's the potential to get traded for picks or whatever. And neither, I don't suspect that either DeHaan or Shaw will get a first-round draft pick in a return. I think they'll get maybe a second, maybe a third, maybe a fourth. Which is why the Saad trade is so irritable, that he probably would have got you a first-round pick at the trade deadline. So, again, I really don't understand what the point of that trade was, because you effectively got the same player that Dennis Gilbert was, just older and more established. You're retaining salary, and you didn't get a prospect or a pick. And you traded off your top six. I guess you made a roster spot for Suda, but you then blocked one of your rookies on defense with Zadorov. So I don't know what you're doing there, unless they're planning on moving DeHaan before the season starts. And again, I don't imagine Kalinuk's going to be happy if he was in fact promised a roster spot and now he's starting in Rockford. So I don't know what's going to go on there, but obviously let's talk about the future. So I looked at their cap space for next year. They have $19 million in cap space next year. Now, all of the guys they've signed, I guess, thankfully, are on one-year deals. Zadorov's a one-year deal. Janmark, Walmark, they're all one-year deals. Somebody will be gone from the expansion draft as well, and we don't know what's going to transpire at the trade deadline. So the 2021 draft is not anywhere close to as good as this year. However, it is a highly rated defensive draft. 6 of the top 10 prospects are defensemen. One person has the top 3 picks being defensemen. The final Hughes brother, the youngest Hughes brother, Quinn's brother, is a defenseman, Luke Hughes. He is averaging to go around the 7th to 9th pick. So he's not even ranked as the top defensive prospect. One of the top defensive prospects is Owen Power. He's a 6'5" defenseman. Again, I can't imagine the Hawks taking him if they have somewhere in that vicinity, because now they have Zadorov, who's 6'6". He basically is kind of.
I think all of the right. This sort of discussion is extremely tentative, right? Because you
Right.
still have your hockey to go, and you're going to end up seeing some forwards really shine, and they're going to jump up the draft boards. And instead of your 6 of 10, there might be split down the middle, or 4 of 10 are all of a sudden defensemen. So I get what you're saying, but I think there needs to be some value in the next year or so of really seeing how this shakes out, because I think you and I both know that we're going to sit here and talk about all these defensemen, and then 3 or 4 days before the draft we're going, this center out of so and so, he should be the guy. But I
don't. So the reason I'm saying that I don't, if you want a defenseman, obviously next year's the year to get. And the reason I'm suggesting that, there's a reason for it. Because in 2022, they have what they're calling the 3-headed monster. That was the quote out of Sports Illustrated. The top 3 picks in that draft are all centers, at least tentatively, are all centers, and they're all in a normal draft first-round picks. And the top prospect right now is Shane Wright, who, buckle up, folks, broke Connor McDavid's point per game record.
Stud.
And he did it as a freshman, or his first year in junior. He has been given elite status, or special status as they call it, up in junior. The other 2 Centers are Matthew Savoy and Brad Lambert. So they're all centers. Obviously, Shane Wright, when you start breaking Connor McDavid's records, you're starting to get, let's say, a little notoriety. Now, I'm not suggesting that the Blackhawks are going to be the first overall pick in 2 years. Just pointing out that those three players, especially Wright, are superstars. And there's a lot of other talents below them in that draft. Um, so, tentatively speaking, and hypothetically speaking, if the plan is to take about a 2-year hiatus here to, I assume this year, kind of phase out your veterans, right? You phase out Andrew Shaw, or at least you try to phase out Dane, or I keep saying Dane DeHaan. No, not the overrated actor, the overrated defenseman, Kyle. Calvin DeHaan, you bring in, one of your defensive prospects, you bring up somebody, Kurashev, Tepley, whoever that you have, maybe even Brandon Peary for this first year. And then you're not really horrible this year, right? You're kind of still slightly respectable. But then you really tank next year because you don't bring anybody else in. Now, whether you bring Janmark or Walmart or Carpenter back, I think Carpenter's another guy that you might trade for. Teams are always looking for like penalty killers at the trade deadline, defensive minded guys. So any of those guys can get moved. Perhaps Camp is let go. I don't know. There'll have to be decisions there between those four guys who you want to keep, who you want to move out, especially when you get Highmore, Hagel, others kind of same type players in Rockford. But figuratively speaking, let's say they get a defenseman in this upcoming draft and then they're in the top 5 picks in 2022. You're going to get a superstar forward in 2022. You get your defenseman in 2021. At this point, Strome will be, 25. DeBrincat will be 24. Kane and Toews will both be about 34. Kirby Dach will be 22. 21. And Boquist will be 22. Mitchell will be, what is he, 22 now? He's 21, so he'll be 23. Kalynuk will be 25. Regula will be 22. Lankinen will be 27. So, and it's the last year, by the way, of Kane, Toews, and Keith's contracts in 2023. So, and Kubalik will still be here. He'll be 27. So you'll have that superstar forward tentatively, hypothetically, that I've been talking about, and you'll have a top prospect defenseman. And Lucas Reichel, who you just took this year, will also be on the horizon. So this is why I'm saying this isn't like a tear it down rebuild. If they do the right things, development-wise, and, keep them, they don't do anything to make themselves, let's say, middling again. They kind of set themselves back, and this is what I was saying in the previous episodes on Natty Nights that we talked about this, in terms of they really shouldn't have beat Edmonton. They kind of set themselves back by beating Edmonton because they could have got a much better player if they'd been in that 9th, 10th spot where they would have been had they not beat Edmonton. But they did. So they got Reichel, guys a little bit farther away, but still, assuming that you move out to Han and you bring in a rookie in, Shaw goes, you got another rookie. Who knows? I really don't know what they're doing with Nylander. That's a really interesting decision that they've got there. Is he a part of the future? It doesn't really feel like it, but who knows? Um, but yeah, so I mean, what do you think about that? Do you think that makes sense? Do you think that's just being overly optimistic?
No, I mean, I think the way that it's set up right now, right? If you look at their system, whether you want to admit that forward depth is an issue or not, I think basically what they're trying to do is have this second wave of 08, 09, 9, 10, where Toews and Kane were your young guys, the superstars, and you had a young core. I think they're trying to replace that without tearing everything down and sucking for 5-6 years. Even though that's pretty much what they've done, but what I mean by suck is like you're 15, 20 games under 500,
Yeah,
and
you're the Red Wings.
yeah, right. You don't want to red wing yourself into a contention. Um, but it seems like some of the moves that they make sort of contradict that.
Yeah, well,
And
that's the interesting part about the Yanmark and Walmart
right,
signings, which is why I say I think those moves, because they're 1 year deals, I think
I think
those
that,
guys are going to end
you
up
think
being
those are
like,
bridge. You think those are bridge deals?
no, I think, well, I don't know. And again, it is Stan Bowman, but in theory, those are guys, including Carpenter, who was already on the roster, but especially Yanmark and Walmart. Those are defensive forwards. They're on expiring contracts. Those are guys that you can trade at the trade deadline for assets, because teams are always going to want penalty killing, defensive minded players. And Yanmark especially can put the puck in the net. I mean, he's older, right? So it seems like his ceiling is met at 27, but I mean, he was a big part of Dallas's Stanley Cup team, or at least their final appearance this year. And then, Walmart, that's a Quenneville guy. That's the guy Joel Quenneville acquired from Carolina at the trade deadline. That's somebody they wanted. So that alone, I think, should probably speak somewhat to him. Um, but those are guys that can be moved. The other point that I didn't really touch on that I meant to, which is why I brought up that they have right now, according, and this is if obviously they don't over exceed the cap with their bonus money, but they have $19.5 million in cap space next year. Now, again, that's with all of these 1 year contracts coming off the books and without Strome's contract. So let's say, again, 2.5 million for Strome. Maybe they keep Zadorov 3.5, 4 million. So what are you at? You're at about 14.5 to 15 million in cap space. They can take on bad contracts. And since you don't have Sod anymore, maybe that's where you get your draft capital to kind of restock the cupboards, where you go to Vancouver, you go, oh, Louis Erickson that you've been wanting to get rid of all these years. Yeah, we'll take his last year, the last 2 years or whatever. We'll bring him in, and we want your first round pick though. And we want like I don't know, a fourth round prospect or something as well.
Yeah, but I mean that's just it. I don't necessarily feel confident in Stan Bowman's negotiation tactics.
Well, that's just it too. And
No.
it's, I was thinking about this with obviously the Ricky Renneria firing with the White Sox. Same thing, Renneria got dumped for Joe Madden with the Cubs. Renneria is going to go down in history for that, but especially if the White Sox ended up winning the World Series next year. But I think it's important, like, is Colleton Ricky Renneria? Is he the guy that's
I
just
hope
like,
so.
is he the bridge? Like, because you're planning on sucking the next 2 years. Is that why he's still around? That's why we didn't go out and, go get a Boudreaux or Laviolette or
Dude,
Gallant,
I really
whoever.
hope so because I feel very, very I feel similar that I do of Ricky Renteria and Jeremy Colliton, except I have more respect for Ricky Renteria. I'm sorry, like I really don't. There's not an ounce of me that likes Jeremy Colliton, and it feels like look, you can sit here and say all you want about it was sort of an unfair shake. He got thrown into the fire and blah 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 blah. It's not my problem. Like you could have said no. It's I have an issue with that argument. Um, but maybe there is something to say about that. Maybe there is something to say about Jeremy Colliton's going to be the bridge guy until we're ready to go, and then we can get a veteran coach in here that can take care of things. But at this point in time, I'm not confident in Stan Bowman making that decision. I feel like they think when they brought Jeremy Colliton in, I seriously think that they felt that they hit this thing out of the park and they got this next up and coming young coach.
Yeah, well, I think he's similar to what the Maple Leafs and Dubas are doing with Sheldon Keefe. I think they wanted to go younger. The league as a whole, just with player personnel, is going younger. And I think, you look at John Cooper with Tampa. He was younger when he was first hired. You look at Cassidy out in Boston. And who's the coach out in Pittsburgh that used to be in the Blackhawks organization? His name's escaping me. But you look at those three guys, they both were kind of younger, unheard of guys that were brought up. And then obviously Sheldon Keefe too. But what's interesting too there is Colliton didn't have a pedigree as a player either. Like
no, he's garbage.
Sheldon Keefe was a Stanley Cup winner in Tampa Bay. Like he had some sort of pedigree, and obviously it's one of the humorous things is that when Tampa was playing Columbus, Tortorella did not like Sheldon Keefe, and then they were coaching against each other. That was one of the storylines this year. But it's very strange, and I want to go, I guess, circle back and maybe end with this. I agree with you with Bowman at the helm. It's hard, really hard. I think most people can see kind of what I laid out and was talking about with how they can do a quick fix with this in 2 years to kind of, and even, like I said, Kane and Toews will be 34 going on 35 that season. If you look at Joe Thornton, Joe Pavelski, Getzlaf, these older players, not what they were, but they can still put up about 40 or 50 points a year. So if you've got, DeBrincat at 25 in his prime, you got Doc at 22 entering his prime, you got Strome at 25 in his prime, you got one of the big guns in that 2022 draft, you still got Kubalik, you got Suda potentially. Like, there's an offense there. Like if and you can keep Kane and Toews around to kind of, usher in the new kids as they kind of go into retirement towards the twilight of their careers. But I don't, like I said, this organization right now feels like pre-Kane and Toews Chicago. They don't have a president. Like Danny Wirtz seems like a guy that's just kind of letting Stan Bowman do whatever the hell he wants.
Yep.
And that seems like a problem. And everybody before, I think, was saying, well, John McDonough wasn't letting Stan Bowman blow it up. Stan wanted to blow it up 2 years ago, but John McDonough was worried about, getting butts in seats and the counting aspect of the team. And it's like, well, okay, but if that's the case again, that's a problem. Why? Like, John McDonough's not a hockey guy. I mean, I'm sorry, but the Blackhawks basically took the Tribune Company, Chicago Cubs front office, and put it in the Blackhawks. Jay Blunk is there, John McDonough. They were all running the Cubs with Jim Hendry before Kane and Toews. Dale Talon and company basically built the core as to what it was. They drafted Crawford. They drafted Keith. They drafted Seabrook, Kane, Toews. They brought Hossa in. They acquired Sharp. All of the stuff that was done, the core pieces of the Blackhawks, aside from Shaw, Saad, and Oduya, Jarmelson, everybody, like 3/4 of the core Blackhawks were done in a regime prior to Stan Bowman and John McDonough. So, there just seems like, I don't know if the ownership just doesn't give a shit.
Well, that's why I always scoff at people like who want to give Stan Bowman all this credit, because really, if you think about it, Stan Bowman was given the keys to the ship and he was given the steering wheel to the ship, and all he had to really do was make sure he don't crash into anything.
Right.
And it's not very hard to do when you have the players of the caliber that you've had. And you've had Joel Quenneville. Like, it's pretty easy to go, you mean all I got to do is 10-2 and we're going to be good? I can do that. So
well,
I don't know.
You look too, like I said, the nepotism that's there. You can't tell me that Bowman had no hockey experience whatsoever. He came in as I think an accounting guy originally, and then obviously they brought in Scotty to kind of be
not doing well with the cap, but which is sort of ironic because he's not doing well with the cap.
So. Well, right. Well, I mean, and they brought Scotty in, so I guess the point where I'm going with that is I kind of alluded to it earlier. All of the connections, all of the scouting, all of that is really Scotty's connections, his dad's connections that they brought over to the Hawks, right? So it's hard to even give him credit for stuff like Shaw and Saad and the trade for Oduya, which they got. I mean, that was probably really his best trade. But Andrew Ladd, Hossa, Sharp, all of those guys, even on the 2010 team, Dustin Byfuglien, all of those guys were pre-Bowman. The only real credit that he should get is for Oduya, Shaw, and Saad. And then maybe everyone wants to throw Antoine Vermette in there, which I mean, anybody could bring Antoine Vermette in when you've got draft capital. They gave up a first-round pick for him. And, I mean, Antoine Vermette, I'm sorry, was not a first-round pick caliber player. And then all of the other trades, right? And obviously he brought in Panarin, but then he gave Panarin away for basically nothing. So it just – I don't know. It's hard to be optimistic and take this outlook that I was talking about with Bowman at helm. And I think part of that may be the refusal to just come out and say what they're doing. Are we retooling? Are we rebuilding? Even in this cap the way it is, if they really wanted to move Kane, they could move Kane. They really wanted to move Toews, they could move him. That would be tearing it down. So if that's what they wanted to do, then they should come out, say it, and then start working the phones. But then again, do you really want Bowman making those trades?
Right.
So, it seems to me they gave Bowman a contract extension last year. I think I alluded to on our exclusive on Natty Nights that basically that's why he went roughshod and brought in Shaw, DeHaan, Mata, and spent – they had $20 million last year. Leonard, all this money they went and spent. And then, we don't know if Shaw's healthy. DeHaan, we're already – it's been 1 year. We're already talking about trying to trade DeHaan. Mata's gone. Leonard's gone. I don't know what the purpose was with that cap money.
No, I mean, it's sort of last year. I'm going to be honest with you. Going into last year, it felt like this was a one final swing at it. Let's see if we can get it done. And then if not, I don't know what. We'll see what happens. That's kind of what it felt like.
Yeah, I agree, which is interesting because that felt like we're ready to compete again. Those moves,
Yeah.
and
And the
you
guy
really
behind the bench,
weren't.
I'm going to say this every single time this comes up. Anytime the word contention comes up, the guy behind the bench is going to be a roadblock. He is not the guy. I'm telling you. I'm telling you. I've seen this so many times with the teams that I've watched. He is not the guy.
Well, I think most people at least agree with that. And I think,
I don't know. Well, yeah, you said most. There are some Colladin stands out there.
eh, yeah, I mean, well, and that's just okay. So then, like we said, if he's just a Ricky Renneria, then I mean, are you going to have the Babcock and Laviolette and Gallant guys available in 2 years?
Probably not.
Well, I mean, that's the other thing I think that has to go into that conversation. If you can get your guy now, I mean,
Do it now.
yeah, I mean, and then even if you're developing your Docs into Brinkets and Stromes, Suda and Kubalik, even I guess. Although, like I said previously, he's kind of on the older end of things. But I don't know. I guess just kind of some final thoughts to kind of wrap it up. I think we're both. I don't know. Like I suspect they'll be mediocre this season, and then really bad next season, and that they're trying to get ready, as people have speculated, for 2023, which arguably, if you have two top 5, top 10 picks the next two drafts, and then you add Reichel into that conversation as well as Kaimov, who's over in Russia, you might have something there. But until they either say what they're doing or there's some sort of changing of the guard in the front office, it's hard to believe that they're going to be able to turn this around.
I'll tell you what, it's also hard to believe. I'll close with this. Making these decisions and finding ways to upset Toews and Kane and Keith, who you can argue Duncan Keith is going to play until he's 45. That makes me lean more toward when their contracts are up, they're gone.
Well, see, and I think that's the if even if you piss them off, they'll Keith will be 40 and Kane and Taves will be going on 34, 35. If you've got the like if let's just say in 2023 everything happens the way I kind of laid it out. They're not necessarily a cup winner, but they're kind of like the 2008 Hawks where they get to the Western Conference Final and you can see like they're going to raise holy hell next year, and then they should, because I are Kane and Taves going to get $10.5 million contracts again? Probably not. So they're going to have some cap flexibility there too.
Well, no, but
So,
then it's the debate on, do you let their contracts expire and let them walk, or do you trade them at the deadline?
well, no, I think you keep them because I think they'll be. I think they'll if stuff goes right, they'll be competitive in 2023. They'll be a playoff team, but I don't see them necessarily winning the thing. I think like it'll be like 2008 where you don't have Hossa yet, right? You lose to Detroit in the WCF, and then you kind of retool for that run the next season, and then obviously your new kids have a year or 2 years under their belt, and you look at Kane and Taves and you go, well, we're ready to win again. Do you want to stick around? We're one of the better teams in the league. You've spent your whole career here. Will you take 8.5 million? Will you take $1.5 million pay cut? Or $2 million pay cut? That'll save us $4 million on the cap. We can go and spend that on something else. And at that point too, the cap should be up from what it is now. So Does that happen? Duncan Keith, I think, might be more interesting to see where he's at age 41 when his is up, especially with all their prospects. Murphy will be up too. He'll be up in 2022. Do they keep him around? He'll be 29 years old. You'd probably let him walk. I would think if you've got Mitchell, Boquist, you take another D-man in 2021. You've got Regula, who looks good. Kalinuk's bouncing around still. You don't know. And is Zadorov still around? I don't know. Yeah, I mean, he must be, because for what they gave up for him, he has to, I would assume, be part of the long-term plan, at least if Bowman is still here. So, yeah, I don't know. DeHaan will be gone. Shaw will be gone. Strome may be gone, depending on what he does. But, and again, this is also, in theory, that Alex DeBrincat does better next year than he did last year. I mean, he would have to be pretty bad to not do better than last year, but that would throw a monkey wrench in it too if he's being overpaid. But yeah, I mean, DeBrincat's a free agent too with Kane and Toews with Keith. That's like $40 million that comes off the cap that year. So, and Kubalik too. He got a crap ton. So, I mean, I think too a good comparison would sort of be like the Sharks. That year they went to the final against Nashville, or not Nashville, but Pittsburgh. They had Thornton and Marlowe, who were kind of on the twilight of their careers, and then you had Couture and LeBlanc and Meyer, and Pavelski was kind of in between. Maybe he is your Kubalik, but that kind of a structure might be what they're going for. But yeah, so I mean, I guess we'll see. It's going to be interesting, that's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I of course everything that was covered in this episode was pretty much speculation, but these things could change tomorrow. One big move. We're one big move away from this episode meaning absolutely nothing.
Yeah. But anyway, thanks, Josh, for coming on. I know I'm going to do a prelude kind of before we get into this on the actual podcast. But the plan, I believe, right now is for Riding the Pine to come back. Josh is going to be, I think, a frequent guest. I've got some other people I'm talking to come on. We're looking at doing game days, reviews, and hopefully Black Friday this year. I'm looking at getting a bunch of equipment so we can really make this an actual video podcast, new microphone, mixers, all that kind of good stuff to really bring the show up in quality. So hopefully you'll check out this show, Riding the Pine with me. You'll also show Josh some love. Again, you can find him over at Josh Barlog on Twitter. He is the host of Natty Nights with, I believe, it's Ryan, correct? Is he your co-host, or is he just kind of a guest?
No, he's a co-host. I think he's got a big boy job that's
right.
that's gonna take priority. So probably in the next couple weeks I'll be riding solo over there. But yeah, for now he's the co-host.
Right. And as we said earlier, you can find that every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 8 p.m. Central. I do not know when we will be doing another Riding the Pine podcast. It's probably going to be either when some news breaks, or if I think of something clever to do in the downtime in the off season, we'll do it. But until next time, guys, thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you soon.